The first thing I noticed was the way he looked at my bookshelves. Not at the books, at the space between them, the gaps where things could be hidden or taken. My daughter had been with Owen, that was what she called him, Owen, always with a small smile like the name itself was something she was proud of. For just over 2 years when she brought him to my place in Oakville for the first time. This was March, the kind of March where the snow is still there, but it's lost its dignity, gray and sunken along the edges of the driveway. I remember standing at the door watching them come up the walk, my daughter's hand tucked inside the sleeve of his coat, and thinking, he walks like a man who has already decided he belongs somewhere before he's been invited in. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a land surveyor in southern Ontario. I have measured the earth for a living. I know the difference between a man who is looking at something and a man who is calculating it. He shook my hand, firm, practiced, the handshake of someone who learned from a book. "Sir," he said, "I've heard so much." I said something polite, I can't remember what. I was watching his eyes move to the corner of the living room, where I keep the credenza, the old oak one my wife picked out the year before she got sick. There's nothing valuable in it. Old tax files, a bottle of scotch I haven't opened since Christmas. But he looked at it the way people look at things they are already thinking about moving. My daughter. I'll call her my daughter throughout this, because that is what she is, not a character in someone else's story. She was 31 at the time. A dental hygienist in Burlington. Steady, sensible girl. Not the kind to be swept off her feet. I would have told you. I would have been wrong. Owen was 34. He told me he was in real estate investment, which is a phrase that means many different things, and in his case meant he had a license he wasn't actively using and a portfolio he never showed anyone. He drove a leased BMW. I know it was leased because 3 months into knowing him, my daughter let slip that he was sorting out his cash flow, which is another phrase that means many different things, but I'm getting ahead of myself. That first dinner in March, he helped clear the table. He asked about my work. He laughed in the right places. He called me sir twice more, and then switched to my first name, Norman, with the comfortable ease of a man crossing a threshold he hadn't been invited to cross. My daughter looked happy, the way she used to look when she was small, and had done something she was proud of, and wanted to know if I'd noticed. I noticed. I smiled. I said nothing about the bookshelves. The engagement happened in September. A restaurant in downtown Toronto, she told me. He'd arranged a photographer. The ring was, and I say this as a man who knows nothing about jewelry, large. I know what things cost in this province. That ring cost money that someone with a cash flow problem should not have been spending. I told myself I was being an overprotective father. I told myself that plenty of times over the following months. They set the date for the following June. My daughter threw herself into planning the way she does everything. Completely methodically, with color-coded spreadsheets and a binder that lived on her kitchen counter. She wanted the ceremony at the Ancaster Mill. She'd loved that place since she was a teenager. 5 hours, sit-down dinner, about 120 guests. I agreed to cover the venue and catering, which together came to just over $40,000. This is not unusual for a wedding in this part of Ontario. I had the money. I had been saving for 30 years because my wife made me promise I would, and I had kept that promise even after she was gone. Owen's family was contributing what they could. That was how my daughter phrased it. We met them once, his parents, at a dinner in Mississauga in October. His father was quiet. His mother spoke almost entirely about property values and what certain neighborhoods used to be like. Owen laughed along with everything she said. He had the look of a man performing at a family dinner he had rehearsed. I drove home on the 403 that night, thinking, something is off, not dramatically off. Not in a way I could have explained to anyone, just the calibration was wrong. Like a measurement that comes back a few centimeters short and you can't find the error. The first concrete thing happened in February. My daughter called me on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual. We usually talked on weekends. She sounded careful, that's the only word I have for it, like she was choosing each sentence before she said it. Owen was asking about your RRSP again, she said. I just wanted you to know. He brought it up. What did he say? He said. She stopped, started again. He said it might make sense financially for you to restructure things. Before the wedding, he mentioned a financial advisor he knows. I asked her what she thought. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I don't know, Dad. I just thought you should know." We talked for a few more minutes about nothing in particular. Before she hung up, she said, "He doesn't know I told you." I sat with that for a long time after we said goodbye. The next morning, I called my own financial advisor, a woman I've worked with for 11 years, who knows my situation down to the decimal point, and told her what my daughter had said. She listened. Then she said, "Don't change anything, and don't discuss your finances with anyone you haven't personally vetted." 2 weeks later, I quietly transferred the beneficiary designations on my RRSP and my life insurance to a trust held by my lawyer. I didn't tell anyone. March brought the second thing. My daughter mentioned, in the course of a conversation about florists, that Owen had been asking about my house. Specifically, its assessed value. He'd apparently looked it up on MPAC, the Ontario Property Assessment Database, which is public, and had mentioned to her that, given my age, it might be practical to think about what I'd do with it long term. Whether I'd considered downsizing, whether I'd thought about assisted living. I'm 63. I run 5 kilometers 3 times a week. My doctor told me last year that my blood work looks like a 50-year-old's. But I listened. I thanked my daughter for telling me. I made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table and thought about the kind of man who, 8 months before his wedding, is calculating the assessed value of his future father-in-law's home. The house in Oakville is paid off, has been for 9 years. It's worth, depending on the market, somewhere between $900,000 and just over $1 million. I bought it with my wife in 1997. We painted every room ourselves. There is a mark on the doorframe of my daughter's old bedroom, where we measured her height every birthday until she was 17 and told us to stop. I thought about all of that while I drank my coffee. Then I called my lawyer. What I found out over the next 6 weeks, I found out carefully and quietly, and without Owen knowing I was looking. My lawyer connected me with a woman who does due diligence for estate and family law files. She's not a private investigator. She doesn't follow people around, but she knows how to read the paper trail that people leave when they're trying to build a version of themselves that doesn't quite match the original. What she found: Owen had declared personal bankruptcy in 2019. He had not disclosed this to my daughter. The BMW was leased under his mother's name because he couldn't qualify on his own. The real estate license had lapsed in 2021. He had 2 civil judgments against him in Ontario, one from a former business partner, one from a landlord, both under $10,000, both unpaid. He was not a real estate investor. He was a man in his mid-30s who was very good at looking like one. My lawyer laid this out for me in her office one Thursday afternoon in April, 8 weeks before the wedding, and asked me what I wanted to do. I said I wanted to think. I drove home along the lakeshore. It was one of those late April days in Ontario that can't decide if it's winter or spring, the sky pressing down flat and colorless. I thought about my daughter on the phone in February, choosing her words carefully. I thought about the way she'd said, "He doesn't know I told you," and what it meant that she felt she had to say that. I thought, she knows something. She may not know everything, but she knows something is wrong, and she is afraid. I did not call her that night. I thought about it, and I decided not to. Not yet. Instead, I started to prepare. The wedding was June 14th. I am going to tell you what happened that day exactly as it happened, because I have thought about it many times since, and I want to get the sequence right. I arrived at the Ancaster Mill at noon. The ceremony was at 2. The venue is beautiful in June. Old stone building, the falls visible through the windows, everything green and full after a wet spring. The catering staff were setting tables. My daughter was somewhere upstairs with her maid of honor and 2 friends, getting ready. I had not spoken to her privately since a brief phone call the week before in which she'd said everything was fine and her voice had said something different. Owen arrived at 12:30 with his best man, a friend from university named, I'll call him the best man, because his name doesn't matter here. They stood near the bar that wasn't open yet, Owen in his suit, looking like the occasion suited him. He caught my eye across the room and smiled and raised one hand. I nodded back. At 12:55, I was standing in the corridor outside the bridal suite, not certain why I was standing there, when the door opened and my daughter looked out. She was in her dress. It was ivory, simple, the kind of dress her mother would have called elegant without trying. She looked at me, and her face did something complicated. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" she said. We stood in the corridor. Her maid of honor had tactfully closed the door behind her. My daughter said, "Dad, I found something last week." She had been using Owen's laptop to print a document, something about the venue, a form the caterer needed, and she'd seen an email. She hadn't been snooping. It was open on the screen. The email was from Owen to a man I'll call his associate, someone she'd met once at a party and hadn't liked. The email was dated 3 weeks before the wedding. She had screenshotted it on her phone before she closed the laptop. She showed me the phone. I read the email twice. It was, in plain language, a plan. Not a vague plan. A specific one. Owen intended within 18 months of the wedding to begin the process of rationalizing my assets. That was the word he used. Rationalizing. Starting with a pressure campaign to move me into a retirement facility. He believed that once I was transitioned, his word, my daughter as next of kin, would have significant influence over my estate. He had already spoken to a financial planner who specialized in what he called elder wealth restructuring. He named a figure. It was not far from what my estate was actually worth, which told me he'd done his homework. The associate had written back one line. "Smart. She's going to do whatever you tell her." I handed the phone back to my daughter. She was watching my face. "How long have you had this?" I asked. 6 days, she said. "Why didn't you call me?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Because I kept thinking I was wrong. I kept thinking I was reading it wrong, or that there was an explanation, or—" She stopped. "I almost talked myself into marrying him anyway, Dad. I was standing here an hour ago in this dress, and I almost convinced myself it was nothing." I knew what that meant. I had read enough the past month to understand that this is what people do when they are afraid, and when the alternative to believing a lie is dismantling the life they have built around it. I put my hand on her shoulder. "You're not wrong," I said, "and you didn't talk yourself into it. You opened the door." She said, "What do we do?" I said, "Let me handle the next part. I want to be honest about what happened next, because I've told this story a few times now. To my sister, to my lawyer, to a friend I've known since we were in our 20s, and I've noticed that in the telling, people want me to have had a plan, something dramatic, a speech, a document produced at the right moment, irrefutable and devastating. The truth is simpler, and I think more honest." I went downstairs. I found Owen near the bar, still closed, talking to his best man. I asked if I could speak with him privately. He came with me easily, still smiling, the kind of man who believes he knows how conversations end before they begin. We stood in a small anteroom off the main hall. A coat room, essentially. Empty hangers, a bench, the smell of old wood. I said, "I know about the bankruptcy." His face didn't change much. A slight settling, like a building shifting in bad weather. I said, "I know about the civil judgments. I know about your mother's name on the lease. I know about the email you sent 3 weeks ago." Now his face changed. I said, "My beneficiary designations were changed in February. My house is held in a structure my daughter can explain to you if you want. But the short version is that it can't be touched by a spouse without my direct approval, which I will not be giving. My lawyer has copies of everything, and my financial advisor has been briefed." He started to say something. I raised one hand. "I'm not interested in a conversation," I said. "I'm interested in you understanding that there is nothing here for you. Not now, not in 18 months, not ever. My daughter knows. She has for 6 days." The smile was gone completely now. What was underneath it wasn't anger exactly. It was the particular blankness of a man who has been found out and is recalculating. "The ceremony is in 50 minutes, I said. "I think you know what the right thing to do is, for everyone's sake, including your own." I left him in the coat room. I went back upstairs. My daughter was sitting on a small chair near the window in the bridal suite, still in her dress, her maid of honor's hand on her knee. She looked up when I came in. I sat down across from her. "It's done," I said. "He knows everything. He knows there's nothing to gain." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Is he going to?" "I don't know what he's going to do," I said honestly. "But whatever he does, we'll handle it." She nodded slowly. Outside the window, the falls were running hard and white from the spring runoff. 20 minutes later, the wedding coordinator knocked on the door to say the groom had asked her to let us know that he would not be proceeding with the ceremony. He had left the venue. His best man had left with him. I will not tell you that what followed was easy, because it wasn't. There were 118 guests downstairs. There were centerpieces that had taken 3 months to source. There was a photographer I had to speak with, a caterer who needed instructions, a seating chart that no longer made sense. My daughter's aunt, my late wife's sister, had flown in from Calgary. There were explanations to give, and there were people who were kind, and people who were awkward, and people who said the wrong thing. And through all of it, my daughter sat at a table near the window with her shoes off and a glass of sparkling water, and handled it with more composure than I would have managed. She didn't cry until the drive home. I drove her back to Burlington in the early evening, the summer light going golden over the escarpment, and somewhere on Highway 6, she started crying quietly, and I let her cry and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that was better than just being there. After a few minutes, she said, "I picked him, Dad. I actually wanted to marry him." I said, "I know." She said, "How do you not hate me for not seeing it sooner?" I said, "Because I didn't see it either, and I was looking." That was the truest thing I said that day. There are things I should have done differently. I know that now, and I knew it that evening, sitting in my car in my daughter's driveway in Burlington, watching her go inside. I should have told her what I'd found out in April. I was afraid that if I told her, she would warn him. I was afraid she would choose him anyway, and I would lose access to her. I made the decision to protect her without including her in the protection, and that is a kind of arrogance, however well-intentioned it is. She spent 6 days alone with that email on her phone, talking herself into and out of a decision that should not have been hers to make alone, because I had not trusted her enough to make it with the full picture. When I think about my daughter standing in that corridor in her wedding dress, choosing to open the door, I know she would have made the same choice with the information I had in April. She is her mother's daughter. She has always been braver than I've given her credit for. I drove home to Oakville that night. I sat in the kitchen with the scotch from the credenza, finally opened it, and I thought about my wife, who died 9 years ago in March, who had a talent for seeing people clearly that I never fully developed. She would have known about Owen at that first dinner. She would have found a way to tell me quietly, without making a production of it, and I would have understood, I thought. I am still learning how to see clearly without her. That was 11 months ago. My daughter is doing well. She is still in Burlington, still working at the same dental practice. She has a therapist she sees every other week, who has, by my daughter's account, said things worth hearing. She is not dating anyone. She says she is not in a hurry. Owen, I looked him up once, briefly, last autumn, more out of practical caution than anything else. He appears to have moved to Alberta. I wish him nothing, which is different from wishing him well, and different again from wishing him harm. My house still has the mark on the doorframe where we measured my daughter's height every birthday. The last mark is from when she was 17 and told us to stop. She is 32 now. She came for Easter in April, and we had a long dinner, and she helped me make the lamb the way her mother used to make it, with the rosemary from the garden and the mustard crust. And we sat at the kitchen table until almost midnight, talking about things that had nothing to do with any of this. At some point near the end of the evening, she said, "I'm sorry I almost didn't open that door." I said, "You did, though." She looked at me across the table. "We both did," she said. She was right. And that, more than anything else from that whole long year, the paperwork, the due diligence, the coat room, the empty hangars, the drive home on Highway 6, that is what I hold on to.